Hi everyone, welcome to this video which I'm calling Flute Fundamentals in the Time of COVID-19. My name is Liz Marshall and feel free to contact me at any point if you have any follow-up questions about the flute. I'm happy to also FaceTime or do some sort of video chat with any of you. You can reach me at eamarshall1@madisoncollege.edu. I will put that in the notes for this video. So the first thing we want to do is put the flute together. We'll take the body of the flute. So the flute is named, as a lot of the instruments are, head, body, and foot, just like a person. You want to always hold the instrument where the name of the brand is, where there are no keys. Students like to use the rods here for leverage, and that will cause damage. So definitely don't want to grab here. You want to hold here. You want to hold the head joint, avoiding the lip plate, so you're holding it at the bottom. And then as you put it together, making sure it's square. A lot of students tend to insert at an angle, and that will make the joints slowly round, which will make them loose, which is why flute foot joints often fall off in the middle of rehearsals. So to avoid that, direct and straight and twist a little as you insert the head joint. So then you want to go ahead, you can see me doing it naturally, but you want to line up the center of the lip plate, the embouchure hole. You want to line that directly up with your C key, which is your left hand first finger. So you want to line up exactly with these keys right here. And then you can even, the shotgun method, you can even take a look down, kind of make sure that there's an imaginary line going to the center like that. So then again, never holding your flute by the head joint because it could fall out. Holding by the body, you want to grab your foot joint, and then again, holding where there are no keys, you want to, this is the one that tends to round and then get loose and fall off, so you gently twist that and line that up. You want to line up, it seems most flutists will want to put it like this, because it looks like that's how it's supposed to go. But it isn't. It's supposed to go around about like that. I put mine, this is again depending on the distance between your pinky and your ring finger. It might be different for different people, but in general, I put it towards the front of the key. So here would be the middle of the key, right about there. I put mine, actually I guess, towards the front of the key, lined up like that. Okay, so that's step one. Let's talk first about, rather than make a sound, with students it's very difficult to discourage them from making a sound. So you might want to go ahead and do that section with your classes right away. But I'm going to show you, since we're all adults here, I'm going to show you where your fingers go on the instrument. Mine looks a little different. I have this special key that you won't have on yours. Probably the flutes you're dealing with are not open hole keys, and I'm sure you've seen these and you know all about that. The sound does tend to come through the holes and it gives us a bigger sound, and that's why we went to the open hole style. This flute is inline. It's called an inline G, meaning that my G key right here, the one I close when I go from A to G, this would be A, this would be G. Then the G key is in line with the rest. The majority of flutes made lately, meaning in the past 15, 20 years, a lot of people are into ergonomic playing, so we usually play an offset G, which is what your closed hole student flutes will be. They will have an offset G, meaning there's an extra little rod just for these middle keys surrounding the A-flat lever. Okay, so, and my lever looks a little bit different, but just ignore that. Okay, so going with the balance of the flute, let's talk about that first. In the big picture, it's very difficult for students to, that's probably the hardest thing about the playing the flute. The other instruments, obviously, you're going to be able to see your fingers, and here we're playing off to our right side, completely an ergonomic nightmare. So there's lots of things we can talk about with posture and positioning to make that a little bit easier, and I'll show you some of the coping mechanisms kids come up with to make the flute feel more stable that you'll have to break them of. So the flute, I think of it as 4 balance points. The one would be your lower lip on your face. So that would take care of what I think of as the back of the flute. And then you're going to think of with your thumb and your pinky, pinky is usually depressed. So we want to think of that balance as a lever type action. So you're kind of balancing between your pinky and your thumb. And then on the front side of the flute, you have this, your left hand index finger, which sort of helps you. So from all sides, you end up pretty stable once you get used to it. Students will be terrified they're going to drop the flute, and it's a valid concern. So that's why I tend to start with fingerings that make them feel a little more stable, such as G. G is a great note to start on. A lot of band books start on B flat. B flat's a very awkward fingering, so I do tend to start on G. So now the hand position for this hand, you want to have it as if you were picking up a pencil. You want to just have this balance here so that your finger and thumb, you're right underneath like this. Okay, and then your pinky again, most of the time is going to be pushing open, and that's the thing you can easily check for as you walk around a room, is making sure you can just look at the outside of the flute and see whether the E flat key is open or not. So then, again, if you put your fingers on these keys here, so you're going to skip one and then go like this. With student flutes, I tend to have them orient themselves from the lever backwards. So if you think, okay, A flat, clearly pinky goes there, then you back up and you can tell that you do skip one finger. Okay, this one you can tell if you back up, G key, A key pushes this one. So that's an easy way to remember that you don't need to put your finger there. And then C key, you get 2 for 1 on that one as well, because both of these go down at once. Okay, so as far as fingering goes, I often have them place the flute on their knee, and then we can practice fingerings separately from making noise, just making noises from the head joint by itself. So once you're playing with the head joint, it's helpful to have the students hold it like this, so with their own backs of their palms pointing themselves, just so you don't get a lot of pushing towards their own face. We tend to want to stabilize the flute by pushing with our own neck, which then we have to push back somewhere else, creates all kinds of, Peter Lloyd calls it a circle of tension, and you can avoid all that if you're just very loose on here. So there's not a lot of pressure here on the chin. Students who do have, I do have an overbite, and that tends to make a nice sound actually in the flute. So an underbite makes it very difficult for a student to make a sound. You might consider that if you're encouraging them between 2 instruments, maybe lead the person with the underbite, lead them towards a different instrument. Also, I will say, once students tend to get any orthodontic work, it will change the embouchure. Getting both sets of braces at once is actually easier to transition rather than getting one set at a time, which sometimes orthodontists choose to do that. If you just got the upper, you'd end up missing the hole entirely. If you just got the lower, you'd shoot your airstream up. So both of we're able to work around them, but those do create some issues. And as an aside on that, as far as putting wax, I don't think that works for any extended period of time. Usually you just have to build up calluses inside your mouth, and then the students will be fine in a short period. It's very uncomfortable, but then they get past it. Okay, so making a sound, the way you want to put this is you want to kind of find a spot here on your lip in the indentation of your chin that is the lowest that you can manage. So again, if you put the flute like this, that's not a good embouchure. What you want is, I'll get closer here, you want to have it scooped like this. So you want to, in other words, cover this back wall of the flute. So see, there is the back wall, and you want to watch your lower lip be covered like that. So that will make the best sound. That will direct with the majority of the air into the flute. You can experiment like this, moving side to side until you find the natural spot where it comes out. So again, this is all the hardest part about the flute, and a lot of other instrumentalists will become quite dizzy when they first experiment with the flute, because we're blowing across it rather than having our air actually enter the flute. So you can see again, so once you find that spot, you can make a pretty solid sound that way. You'll also notice if I experiment with up and lower, higher and lower, there's definitely a sweet spot where the tone is the most clear. So you may want to just experiment with that by yourselves for a bit. Speaking about air speed and air volume, we have a kind of a flow going on here where if I want to hit a high note, I will need a fast air stream. So the easiest way to do that is to blow a lot of air. That is what kids tend to do. That's why high notes are extremely sharp and low notes are extremely flat on a beginning flute player. So you want to eventually guide your students towards controlling the air speed by the aperture. So the aperture is what I call flute face. The aperture is the opening in your mouth, going from a larger aperture to a smaller aperture. That's the dealing with that system. I used to explain it like driving a stick shift, which is increasingly not relevant for our students today, especially not relevant at all to children. But it's a lot to do with if I just hit the gas and I don't have the clutch in, I'm going to get a flood of gas and I'm not going to go anywhere. If I just take the clutch out, I will kill the engine, so that won't work either. So it's working between the two as a flow. And that is dealing with high notes and low notes. That is what it ends up being. That you're trying to deal with the size of the aperture to control how fast or slow your air goes, while you're also able to control the volume of the air that you're blowing. Volume controlling dynamics, and then the aperture size controlling high notes or low notes. Again, at the very beginning, the less information, the better. Just encouraging the students to experiment with this and encouraging yourselves to experiment with this and make sort of unpleasant sounds until you're becoming more comfortable. So again, lining back up with my C key. I've lined up, oops, here you go. Lining up with the C key. There's my C key. There's my aperture, my opening, my opening in the lip plate. And so now the hard part is finding that sweet spot that we just found, but with on the end of a stick. So that becomes increasingly awkward. As you can see, I've got my finger going from pinkies forward, skipping this key because it already operates that other one. There we go. That's where that goes. Thumb can be down if you want. Pinky here on this, another going pinky forward. So then knowing that those are where your keys are going to be depressed. Let's go with something like a G right now, which would be thumb down and 1, 2, 3. So that's our G. And then leaving this one just pinky, if you can encourage students to do that. So again, now we're just going to experiment with making a noise, putting the flute in that sweet spot, and still finding a way to control Again, you want to sort of scoop your lip as much as you can. So I do a lot of, eventually, working with students with a breathing bag. This is just a 5-liter anesthesiologist bag. There are things online, you can make them yourselves, you can buy them fairly cheaply, and doing with this, you can work on air control. So working on having the slowest possible airspeed for especially a note like G. So let me talk more about that aperture thing I was talking about. If I want to play a high note, I'll try to angle it so you can see. doing an airy sound, I might be overshooting. So in other words, my air is coming too far this way rather than angling down. So you do sort of want to have your air angling towards your elbow. So that's using my aperture, which is pretty advanced for younger students, and for yourselves when you're starting out. You might want to just try with air volume. So increasing the volume, playing louder to get a high note. And eventually working towards experimenting with that. Easy things that I do, maybe just first experimenting with GAB, making up some songs, having kids improvise by doing things like that. B flat. B flat, we call this 1 and 1 B flat, so it's first finger, first finger. So 1 and 1 B flat with your thumb on either key, actually. Ultimately, we do want to use this key for B natural and this key for B flats if they're in the key signature. You do not want to have your students sliding back and forth. That's considered awkward technique, and again, it kind of messes with the balance of the flute, which is the reason for that. I'll show you some things we catch our students doing that are very, very natural for them to do. So absolutely no shame in trying these things. They just come up naturally. But what you'll catch your students doing as far as technique, probably the number one is that they tend to want to hold it here. Of course they do, because it's scary. So encouraging them to move away. I've even had students hold things. I don't have anything in front of me right now, but something like I was using a box that a tuner came in, and I put this here just to keep some space, to keep a long neck. Not that they're compressing on it, it's just a guide to keep a little distance here, a little way to practice that. So that's probably the most common, is they'll use their shoulder to help hold the flute. Other things you'll see is they push their right hand against this rod. So you'll notice them squeezing like this, and you just sort of come up and angle their hand away so that their fingers are pretty, someone once told me, like you're holding a book. Something like holding a book, so that you have a nice relaxed hand position like that. Other things, let's see. Oh, another thing is you'll catch them using their pinky underneath. So, and that is not the worst, but then obviously over time this would be slow and awkward to come up over to hit the A flat lever, so that can be difficult. It's all I can think of for right now. Please feel free to let me know if you have any other questions. You want me to address some different topics. I'm happy to help. And thank you so much for watching my video on flute fundamentals in the time of COVID. Thanks again.